And as inflation hits a 4-decade high, what is President Biden vowing to do? NTD's Iris Tao has more on a new gas policy and its potential impacts.
We're leaning on you, our farmers, our biofuel refiners.
Amid soaring inflation, President Biden's rolling out a new plan he says will increase fuel supply and lower gas prices.
It gives you a choice at the pump. When you have a choice, you have competition. When you have competition, you have better prices.
He announced an emergency waiver on Tuesday to allow E15 gasoline, which contains more ethanol from homegrown crops, to be sold this summer. E15 sales are usually prohibited in summer over air pollution concerns, but the administration said it's needed due to a, quote, fuel supply emergency.
E15 is about 10 cents a gallon cheaper than E10.
Officials said the authorization would reduce reliance on oil and could save drivers 10 cents a gallon off current prices. But its actual impact remains to be seen, as only a small fraction of the country's gas stations currently sell E15 gasoline. Meanwhile, Biden's remark comes as inflation is hitting a 40-year high, with consumer prices jumping 8.5% from a year ago. But the president on Tuesday touted,
in fact, we've already made progress since March inflation data was collected.
And he pointed to Putin.
We saw today's inflation data. 70% of the increase in prices in March came from Putin's price hike in gasoline.
But some in Biden's own party disagree. Senator Joe Manchin wrote in a statement Tuesday that the administration failed to act fast enough, and that instead of acting boldly, it continues to respond with half measures and rhetorical failures, searching for where to lay the blame. And on this upcoming Thursday, the president is traveling to North Carolina to talk more about how he's going to lower the prices. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
The most recent jobs report is now being overshadowed by 40-year high inflation, in part because this has the most tangible effect on the average person's wallet. The inflation rate has jumped from 2% when President Trump left office just over a year ago to 8.5%. Here to break it all down, we have the Heritage Foundation's Peter St. Onge. Peter St. Onge, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks for having me.
Peter, inflation just hit a 40-year high, jumping up to 8.5%. What are some of the biggest driving factors, would you say?
Energy, of course, has really been on a tear recently. The other big factor has been shelter, so rents, home prices, and food at home, which is something that really hits families hard.
Now, would you say, based on what you're seeing, is the economy heading toward a recession, or how will we know, and will we be able to admit it once it does become, or it becomes inevitable?
That's really the big concern. There are increasing fears on Wall Street that we may be headed for a recession. Really, the enormous spending over these past couple of years has sort of painted the Fed into a corner where they are running up against this historic inflation, and there's some concern that if they try to fight that too aggressively, then they might end up sending the economy into recession. And indeed, if that were to happen, we'd actually be looking at stagflation at this point, both inflation and a slowing economy.
So, Peter, does the Fed and the government have any more tricks up their sleeve to prevent an economic downturn, such as they've been using quantitative easing?
There are some factors that you could do in the real economy. So, for example, improving the landscape for oil production, for drilling, transport. A lot of these things, generally they take time. The investments have to be made. So they don't really have much in the way of, magic tricks. Really, the concern at this point is how close can they get to the 1970s solution, right, which was really bringing the rates up quite quickly, sort of shocking people into, lowering their inflation expectations. So can they pull that off without sending the economy into a downturn? And financial markets in general are pretty concerned about that.
Peter, more government, or on the issue of more government spending, would that temporarily reduce the problem, hence the desire from the Biden administration and others to want to spend more, or is that just simply always the desire?
It comes off a lot more like an excuse to just spend more. The root cause of this inflation at the moment is really coming from spending. There was a new report out of the Federal Reserve that was saying this is not COVID. This is, supply chains are actually relatively a small part of it. This is overwhelmingly coming from government spending. And then the Federal Reserve accommodated that by really flooding markets with money. So, the administration so far has really been sort of looking for excuses to spend more trillions. Those new trillions are going to drive up inflation in the short run. It is possible they may do something in the long run, that they may ease pressures a decade down the line. But certainly in the short run, all of that spending is likely to make things even worse.
And Peter, you just touched upon the supply chain. You made me think of the images we're seeing out of Shanghai right now with the lockdowns. Shanghai is home to the world's largest port, the port of Ningbo. Do you anticipate that this could have some serious effect in the United States?
It definitely could. The question is how long that's going to persist. The Chinese regime is very sensitive to public opinion in Shanghai. That's one of the most important places for them. If they continue with these pretty draconian lockdowns, right, people are running out of food. If they keep that up, then it could actually hit the supply chain again. The larger issue at the moment domestically here in the U.S. Is that a lot of firms have actually overbuilt their inventory. It's called the bullwhip effect in inventory management. A lot of firms are actually sitting on too much inventory at the moment. But of course, that can mean too much of one thing, not enough of another thing. So what I think we can say is that there's going to continue to be more disruptions for the consumer. And if China keeps up these draconian lockdowns, we could see a repeat of the kinds of supply chain crises that we had last year.
Peter St. Onge, thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Former President Donald Trump's endorsement of Dr. Oz over David McCormick for Pennsylvania Senate is causing some confusion. After Trump's endorsement came this weekend, some Republicans were concerned that Mehmet Oz was not conservative enough and could hurt GOP chances of winning the seat. A Pennsylvania county chairman said he received over 24 calls from confused voters.
President Trump endorsed Sean Parnell early in the campaign. Sean Parnell is very popular around here. And then he goes and endorses Oz. And these are two very, very different people. Nothing similar at all.
Sean Parnell dropped out of the race after losing a custody battle with his ex-wife, who accused him of abuse. Many voters thought David McCormick would be the top pick. McCormick and Oz are close in the polls. GOP Chairman Ball said callers weren't really upset about the endorsement, but mostly they were confused. Some China watchers say that McCormick's time at McKinsey & Company, a D.C.-based lobbying firm with close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and his time as CEO of Bridgewater & Associates, an investment management company with deep ties to China as well, does raise conflict of interest concerns. As the U.S. Supreme Court is now considering a change in federal abortion law, some states are moving full speed ahead to make their abortion laws more conservative. Oklahoma's governor signed a bill that makes abortion illegal in the state of Oklahoma.
We want Oklahoma to be the most pro-life state in the country. We want to outlaw abortion in the state of Oklahoma.
The new law makes it a felony to perform an abortion in the state. If the law is broken, the convicted person could face up to 10 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. But the mother would not face criminal charges for receiving the abortion. Upon signing the bill, the governor acknowledged it will immediately be challenged by activists who say laws that ban abortion are unconstitutional. This bill passed the Oklahoma Senate with a vote of 38-9 and 70-14 in the House. That's over 80% support from both chambers.
We value life because our God in heaven values life.
And what we are saying here today is the intentional taking of an innocent life has consequences.
The only exception to the new law is if the abortion is performed to save the mother's life. It will take effect 90 days after the state's legislature leaves next month. The governor says abortion is an issue that should be handled by the state and says he's looking forward to the Supreme Court ruling that could return this right to the states if the ruling is conservative-leaning, as is expected.
Senator Ted Cruz is going to publish a book called Justice Corrupted: How the Left Weaponized Our Legal System. A statement from the publisher says the left is using the law as a weapon where judges and prosecutors silence and imprison Americans who oppose their agenda. When Cruz voted against President Biden's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, he described her as the furthest left of any justice ever to serve on the court. His main concern was that she would deprive Americans of their rights.
Judge Jackson, I believe, would support the assertions of government power to silence you, to silence me, to silence the men and women we represent.
Cruz also questioned Jackson on critical race theory taught in K-12 schools. The publishing company says the left's enemies list also includes parents who dare to speak up at school board meetings. The book will come out on September 13th. Governor Ron DeSantis has been called a trailblazer by some and cast as a villain by others for his hard stance on protecting children in Florida from controversial sexual and gender content. Mark Thielman was superintendent of Alsea School District in Oregon and is now running for governor in that state, and we're happy to have him on to discuss. Mark Thielman, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, Mark, on the issue of the parental rights bill that we're seeing in Florida that's been garnering some national attention, it's been dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. Have you read this bill, and do you think this should be part of a broader discussion throughout the country?
Well, I have read the bill. It's a really good bill. The left, the progressive left, tends to use half-truth. So it doesn't say "Don't say gay" in the bill, but this is just a little half-truth they do to cause people not to support it. The reality of it is that it says for grades K through 4 that there will be no discussion or indoctrination or pressure on kids regarding their gender identity. I think that this is beyond a common sense bill, because as a school superintendent, I never implemented any of this in our school district, and largely because similarly for the same reasons we don't let 5-year-olds drive. And to push these issues on kids is an adult issue. It's not an organic issue that kids really naturally deal with. And if there is a child that is dealing with it, that's vastly the exception and not the rule. And that's really what this bill attempts to cement. And I applaud Governor DeSantis and the Florida legislature for writing it, drafting it, and approving it.
Critical race theory, also known as CRT, is another issue that's been brought into the schools, which is rooted in Marxist theory. What are some of the dangers we face with these Marxist underpinnings?
Well, the real danger is what parents aren't aware of. So in the universities, every new teacher is completely steeped and indoctrinated. So if you are reading, let's say, a classic novel, A Tale Between Two Cities, which is an approved curriculum. It's been around for at least 100 years. Instead of talking about analogies in the book, what teachers are trying to do is to bring in issues of gender identity or race, and to talk about analogies in the book using modern day groups. And this is the kind of indoctrination that really our kids don't need. And as a result, they never fully dive into the depth of classic literature. They never get a chance to think freely about poetry. And consequently, they come out not able to think freely or critically as young adults.
Now, you just sort of touched upon it there. With regard back to the parental rights bill, you're seeing some of these leftist school teachers who've just went through years of indoctrination in universities, taking to social media about how they will persist in teaching the children about these topics. It seems like it's almost an ideological battle, and we've seen how, for example, in the war on terror, how difficult it can be to battle against a deeply held ideology. How do you resolve this issue?
Well, it usually creeps up in terms of administrators being present in classrooms and working with those teachers to understand that these kinds of divisive issues impact negatively their relationships with the majority of their students. That was a common problem when I would have a new hire in my school district. We never adopted CRT for the obvious reason that it creates division. And these teachers would learn very quickly that kids wanted to dive into the depth of content, that they wanted to be able to debate and think freely, and they wanted to engage in the pursuit of truth. And that's a very human thing. And so, you know, the issue is the left has put tremendous pressure on administrators. You know, I can speak with personal experience. They literally threaten us here in Oregon with our licenses and with our ability to be an administrator. You know, do this or we will investigate you, we will cause trouble. It's a very oppressive and coercive environment. And it's one that has completely polluted the free academic thought and process here in our K through 12 public schools. So I strongly encourage parents to be very cognizant and very aware, and to really ask detailed questions of their child's teachers, especially if they're in middle school or high school.
Mark Thielman, thank you.
Thank you.
The State Department is ordering non-emergency government staff and their family members to leave Shanghai. Last week, the department gave staff the opportunity to leave voluntarily. On Monday, they've escalated it to an order. The U.S. Consulate General in Shanghai issued a statement saying that the change in posture reflects the changing circumstances on the ground. Shanghai reported over 23,000 new CCP virus cases. Last week, the city reported 26,000 new cases. The outbreak has led to Chinese authorities enforcing harsh lockdowns. Residents have reported starvation from lack of access to food, and protests erupted in parts of the city.